Hello and welcome to The Right Idea, where we discuss the people, policy, and politics that drive Texas. I'm your host, Brian Phillips, and this episode, we're going to go do a little bit different. Derek Cohen, our normal co-host, is not here with me, and sometimes we want to take just a little bit of time, take a moment to dive in, and we're going to call this the Right Idea in depth, where we look at an issue, we kind of get away from the headlines, away from the current events of the day, and want to pause for a second and really jump into an issue that is near and dear to the hearts of Texas, that is an issue that is very important, particularly to families in Texas. Outside of the economy and being able to put food on the table, education is probably the most important issue for families. And so we wanted to jump into a particular issue and a subject that's going on right now. It's actually been going about 2 or 3 years, and we'll get into the history of that. But this is really, let me introduce our guest today is Dr. Tom Lindsay, who is our policy director for higher education here at the Texas Public Policy Foundation, but he's also a member of a board that was created a couple years ago by the Texas Education Agency, and it's called the Open Education Resources Advisory Board, and we'll get into a little bit about what open education resources are and those acronyms. But basically, Tom, the way I want to frame this today in this discussion, and thank you for being here, really appreciate it. The way I want to frame this discussion is, look, in Texas, there's a ton of debate about education, and specifically, of course, over the last 2 years, we've talked a lot about school choice. We've a lot about parent empowerment and the movement behind that. And then, of course, it always, ends up coming down to money with the legislature. They're the ones that appropriate the funds and how much we're going to spend on education. And is it too much? Is it not enough? Is it being spent on the right things? Those kinds of things. Those issues are like 90% of what I feel like we talk about in education. And yet when you ask parents, when you go out and you take surveys or you just go person on the street and you go and talk to parents about what it is that they want, and the number one thing usually is my kid getting the education? Actually, is they're getting prepared in the classroom to be successful? And so we don't really talk about the materials as much and the actual education that kids are receiving and how they're being taught, especially from K through 8. But then the approach maybe to education that we're taking here in Texas, and unfortunately, results aren't what we want them to be. About half of our kids every single year for over a decade, half or more of our kids aren't reading or doing math at grade level. And so I feel like we need to have this discussion today, and I feel like there's no better person, especially right here in the building. We have a board member on this advisory board from TEA, so we want to talk a little bit about what that is. So I'm going to stop there. That's kind of our introduction, but I maybe pitch to you first before we get into the OER and the curriculum and the things that Texas is doing to address these problems. Let's define the problem a little bit, and in your estimation, what is the core problem with education that sort of created the impetus for this reform that's been kind of manifesting over the last couple of years?
Yeah, well, the impetus for this bill comes from state studies that revealed some very disturbing results. They found that in Texas, and not just Texas, the majority of instructional materials for our K-12 students are not on grade level, meaning according to TEAC standards, Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills. And this lack of access to appropriate curricular resources hurts students. It makes it much harder for teachers. They have to do double jobs, and I'll talk about that later. And it also makes it harder for parents to know what's going on. And another state study just recently done showed that only 17% of Texas students are doing on-grade level coursework. That's an education crisis. So the parents who are concerned are right to be concerned. And that's the impetus behind this bill. And it's behind HB 1605, which is the bill that established this process and this board on which I serve. In 2022, the Texas Teacher Vacancy Task Force recommended, and here I quote, funding professional learning and support for teachers to access and utilize high-quality instructional materials, unquote.
And we're going to talk about the high-quality instructional materials as kind of a term of art and a phrase that is used a lot now. So that's where that came from.
Yes, exactly. It means TEKS compliant, right?
And before we jump too forward, I don't want to miss over that point. I mean, as you mentioned, there were studies that were done in which the actual materials, the assignments, the readings, those kinds of things, less than 20% in this study found that less than 20% of the materials that were given to kids, the things that they were being taught, were actually on grade level. And so if you have a fifth grade student, they're receiving third grade and fourth grade level materials. And I think this is something that that we highlight with the confusion that parents have when their kids come home with A's and B's, and yet when they take the tests to assess whether or not they're learning on grade level, they fail the test. And so there's this confusion between, well, why is my kid getting A's and B's in class, but then can't pass the assessment test at the end of the year?
Yeah, and the answer to that is everybody's getting A's and B's. Grade inflation afflicts K-12, as you just mentioned. It also afflicts higher education. In higher education, in the early 60s, only 15% of all grades given nationwide in college were A's, 1-5. Today, an A is the most common grade given in college. 45% of all grades given in college are A's. 75% are A's or B's. So, and this is where K-12 gets it from, because remember, it's the universities who teach the K-12 teachers.
Right.
Prospective employers, graduate admissions committees say, we don't know what to make of these transcripts anymore. It's monopoly money grades.
So let's get into HB 1605. You mentioned that that's the law that was passed by the legislature that created the task force or the advisory committees, and then created the mandates to get the curriculum back to the standard, just to meet the materials that are being created. Those things must match the standards, the TEKS, as you mentioned. So let's go into the legislation, because this is something that created your position. What did 1605 mandate regarding K through 12 education?
Well, it requires the State Board of Education to establish a new process for vetting instructional materials, and it provides additional funding for the districts to use these approved materials. Overall, what it seeks to do is to increase access for teachers and students in school districts to high-quality instructional materials, meaning materials that actually satisfy the TEKS, the Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills. And as we mentioned earlier, right now the majority aren't doing that.
Right. And so your job as part of the advisory board was to do what?
We began meeting. We had a meeting with Mike Morath. Back in October, our first meeting. It was about 13 to 15 of us, all academics with specialties. And so my specialty, I have a PhD in political science, so I'm focusing especially on the civic ed portion of this, although I'm also looking at other things because it's all very interesting. And it really, I think, is just the initial work we're doing. I can already see the improvements that are going to be made, and parents will start to see this in August of 25 when the first batch comes out and begins to be taught. This new process of vetting instructional materials includes funding for districts who want to use it, and $40 per student per year. If they decide they want to print it out, they get an extra $20 per student per year, and everything's available online for free.
And that's what they call the Open Education Resources. So
Exactly.
That's that acronym OER, Open Education Resources. Now let's go into the curriculum a little bit. Like when you're meeting with the advisory board, I mean, what do y'all? I mean, you're having debates, or you're having discussions about what should go in the curriculum, what should not go in the curriculum. How does that discussion go?
Well, let me give you a particular example. There was a unit on the American Revolution, and one of the lesson plans dealt with the midnight ride of Paul Revere. Now, the approach that they are taking, and which I think is very solid, is really a classical education approach, meaning it's cross-curricular. And by that, I simply mean this. Of course, they learn the facts about Paul Revere's ride to warn that the British were coming. But they also learn about the art of the period, the science of the period, the culture, the history. So it's a full picture, and it really, I found, really engages the reader. And that's the new. In other words, obviously you want students to come away with content, but you want to do more than that. Kids, especially, all human beings, but kids especially, are naturally curious. And the job of the teacher is to take that curiosity and channel it higher. And the cognitive science discoveries that inform the construction of this really engage students. Now, as I said, I have a PhD in political science, and as I was reading the fifth grade lessons, I was reminded of the show, Are You Smarter Than a Fifth Grader? I mean, this is, as the bill requires, material we're viewing is rigorous. Now, it's age appropriate, and also it has measures by which you can adjust the intensity of the teaching for individual students. It's all about preserving flexibility.
And I want to talk about that because when the new curriculum, the OER and all of that was first announced, I believe, at the end of May, one of the criticisms was about how challenging they were. And at first it seemed, I don't know if it's insulting or what it is, but of course I have a 2-year-old, so I'm not quite yet, at that point of her going to school and coming home with the materials quite yet. But so I'm just curious what you think parents' reaction is going to be, one, to having their child, receive very challenging, rigorous type materials, but then even to the criticism that maybe their child isn't up to snuff and maybe we should be, dumbing down the curriculum for Texas kids.
Yeah. Well, it reminds me of, I think, the best line from George W. Bush's presidency. And this was before he became president. This was during the campaign in 2000. He referred to what he called the soft bigotry of low expectations. And I had my own one-person focus group for fifth grade while I was reviewing this material because my granddaughter's in fifth grade. And talked with her a lot about the material, and you know what? We underestimate kids. If you present it in a way where you build from the foundations, you engage their curiosity, you align the quizzes, and this all has aligned quizzes. It's part of part of this package that is the OER. Kids can do much more than you think. They really can, and I think we are going to have some very positive results from this. And
kids need to, and this is part of the approach as I understand it too, and kids need to fail, right? Kids need to not get the answer right because it then teaches them to go back and figure out how to problem solve, how to learn how to learn, essentially. And I was reminded, I was listening to a talk show the other day, and they were talking about why did we have to learn all the capitals of the states, or I had to learn algebra and algebra 2 and I'll never use it in my life. And I was reminded, I had the same questions. I talked to a teacher one time, and they explained, it's not just about learning your capitals, which I think people should know, the capitals of states and things like that. But things like algebra or learning, certain scientific, different scientific lessons. It's not just about like knowing what trigonometry is and all of that. It's about how can you be given some kind of instruction and learn a formula or learn how to process something and then execute that and utilize that to problem solve. Those kinds of lessons, whether it's in the algebraic context or some other historical context or whatever, learning how to do that and problem solve and get to the right answer are things that you will be learning and using throughout your entire life.
Absolutely right. I mean, this core curriculum with its classical basis, this is not an idiosyncratic choice that Texas just wants to do this. The core curriculum reflects and then in turn seeks to perfect human nature itself. In other words, by nature, we are, as Aristotle said, political animals. So we study politics. We do civic education as part of the foundation. By nature, we exist within the limitations of time and space. So we study science and we study mathematics. By nature, we have creative capacity. So we study art and literature and creative writing. This core curriculum that they're putting together takes its bearings from the image of a fully flourishing human soul. And all of the elements in it, and all of the foundation courses, are parts of who we are, and the mastery of this material is required for us to develop into fully mature, effective, and informed citizens and leaders.
And one of the other aspects of the new approach to the curriculum, and you said it was cross-curricular, so not only do you learn about the history of Paul Revere's ride, but you said, the art and literature of the time and the science and all of that.
Exactly.
One of the other things is you're not just learning world history or American history, and when I went through it, they just dumped it all on you on ninth grade, right? And then 10th grade was world history, and you literally have 1 year to figure out, from the beginning of time all the way through, World War II, 1942 or whatever. And that's not the approach here. The approach here is to say, let's talk about history every single year. And of course, there are things, that are not, as you said, age appropriate. We're not going to learn about the Holocaust in first grade and second grade. But by the time you get to 9th and 10th grade and you do learn about those things, it's not the first time you've heard of World War II, right? And that's the idea is it's not just cross-curricular each year, but it takes each one of those curriculum and builds on them year to year to year.
That's exactly right. And the scaffolding, which you just mentioned, is a crucial element of this.
Scaffolding, I like that. I'm going to have to use that next time. So we've talked a lot about how this benefits, particularly parents. I mean, that's really where our, the focus is, particularly TPPF, is trying to make parents, put parents first in this, because they're really the people that the education system serves, is whether or not the parents are happy with the kind of education. And I think this is an approach that starts to really move the education system in that direction. But it's not at the expense of teachers.
No, quite the contrary. The bill explicitly seeks to support teachers, to support students, to support families, and the school districts. I mean, remember, this is all optional. It's free and it's optional. And if the schools decide they want to do it, they get extra money, but they don't have to do it. It supports teachers by giving them on-grade level curriculum. See, a big part of the problem right now is teachers are forced to do two jobs, and that's design the curriculum and then design implementation for the particular needs of their particular students. This bill reduces that load. Our teachers are overburdened. For the last 5 years, in the summers, I do here at TPPF, a summer institute for Texas K-12 civics teachers. And I can tell you, because I talk with them a lot, what are the challenges? What are the possibilities? This is really, when teachers find out about what's going to be available, this is going to be very helpful to them. It's not only going to provide them on grade level materials, but it's going to reduce the time that they need to do two jobs when they shouldn't be doing two jobs.
So they can focus on the most important job that they have, which is teaching the material to the children, but then also evaluating whether or not the kids are learning, and as you said, on a case-by-case basis for each child.
Yeah, because the kids are individuals. So it has teacher guides, student activity books, unit plans, lesson plans, aligned quizzes to let teachers do what they're paid to do, to teach.
Now, what if a teacher says, look, this is all great. I'm glad you have this approach, but what I'm doing is already working in the classroom. Does it affect their ability to continue to do?
Entirely optional. Entirely optional. And that's what people need to know. And you asked also, how does it support families? When I read through this bill, I think the spirit that informs it is that parents are a child's first teacher. And we at TPPF agree with that. And it restores the centrality of the parent's role here. Each lesson plan, for example, Midnight Ride of Paul Revere that I mentioned, that I reviewed and vetted, that comes with a family letter. every lesson plan does. It tells parents, this is what they're going to be learning, and it tells parents how they can become involved when the kids come home at night, because that's crucial.
Right. And that's actually the first principle that we learned through the parent empowerment movement is transparency, is that the first thing that parents are the most frustrated with is that they don't really know what's going on in the classroom.
That's right.
And then through the pandemic and all of the online classes, they started to see what was going on in the classroom, and they started to have very strong opinions about what they saw and didn't feel like their kids were getting the education that they wanted to get. And I think, again, to your point here, this really ramps up the transparency.
Oh, yeah.
In terms of what's going on in there, and not just that, but we've also seen studies too that kids do better when parents are engaged in what's going on, and so it's not enough to just say, hey, how was your day, what happened at school today, but that if they have the materials to say, oh, you read Paul Revere's, you read about Paul Revere today, tell me what you learned about it. That level of engagement really enhances the kids' ability to learn.
Oh yeah, the student activity book is designed to be taken home. And all the materials are free to download. And later on, I'll give, in fact, where parents can go if they want to see exactly.
Well, right now, tell us, that's a big piece of this, is that parents can go and actually get the materials and see what their kids are learning.
Yeah, you just go to the SBOE website. So it's SBOE.
State Board of Education.
State Board of Education .texas.gov/IMRA, which is Instructional Materials Review and Approval.
Okay. Well, hopefully, maybe Jefferson, we can put that up on the screen for our folks, or maybe after provide some resources there in case parents didn't catch that. However, not every school is using the high quality instructional materials right now, and there are a handful of schools. I think there's 1,250 districts. I think about a third of them are experimenting over the last couple of years with using them, so they're not fully implemented. So it's not like parents, every single parent out there right now can go and get this. But that's kind of where we are in the process right now, is that now that these materials have been drafted, they've been sort of slowly implemented into certain districts, and we're starting to evaluate how all that's working. However, later on this year, the recommendations that you made will go to the State Board of Education, and there will be a vote there.
That's right. That'll be September of 24. And then because everything the TEA Advisory Board vets and recommends has to be approved by the State Board of Education. And then in August, and once approved in September of 24, in August of 25, as the new school year begins, students and parents will be able to see the full package. But I checked the website before coming on to do this interview, and it does. If you go to that site that I mentioned, it tells you right now where they are in the process.
Okay.
Right, that we're doing K-5, English language and reading, and also math K-5.
And so if you were, had a chance to talk to the SBOE members, which I'm sure you probably do at some point, what's your case? I mean, you're obviously a supporter. This is something that you put your stamp of approval on as being an advisory board member. You worked through the process, and I'm sure you heard different concerns that people had about the curriculum, and you addressed those kinds of things. So what's your elevator pitch then for SBOE members to say, this should be the direction that Texas needs to go?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's no denying the crisis that we face with the majority of classes not teaching on grade level material. I mean, that can't go on. Parents are right to be upset about that. So I'm very optimistic, because this is a serious group. I mean, these are all subject matter experts in their own areas. As I said, I pay very close attention to the civic ed portion, because that's my area of expertise. The organization that Mike Morath has put together for this has really been helpful to us as members, because we come in knowing little things of our own specialties, but not knowing the big picture. This is a very complex arrangement that they've put together, and I'm very optimistic about what the results are, just based on the materials I've already read and vetted over the last 6-7 months. And I know that our contacts in Utah tell us they're going to copy us on this.
Already, before it's even been fully implemented.
Exactly, and not just Utah, right? Because as I said, this is a Texas problem about the lack of courses being taught on grade level, but it's not just a Texas problem.
So I want to get two criticisms, or two concerns, not criticism,
Yeah.
two concerns, one from the right and one from the left, on this approach. And a lot of it, some people are criticizing it and they haven't read the materials. And so, but nevertheless, there's narratives out there, and so we want to address some of those things, and be silly for us not to. The one maybe from the right is very concerned about materials in classrooms that are not appropriate for particularly small young people,
Yeah.
K through 5, to be reading. And we've seen the sort of gender identity and those kinds of things creep into classrooms. Is there anything in this effort in 1605 that would address some of those concerns to make sure that in particularly elementary and middle school, that the materials that are in the classrooms are appropriate for that age level?
When Commissioner Morath met with us, he stressed the importance of our vetting this for age appropriateness. And the bill further allows all parents to see everything. So if parents have concern, go to the site and you'll see everything. You'll see the lesson plans and the unit plans and the quizzes and the course content. So I think that's the best measure that could be taken to ensure that the material is age appropriate. It's a focus on the part of the TEA Advisory Board, and we've got the parents to tell us how good of a job we've done.
And then the criticism from more of the folks on the left is that this curriculum does include biblical references.
Yeah.
It does include references to the Good Samaritan or to the Golden Rule. It has references to King David and Daniel in the Lion's Den. If you're reading Martin Luther King's letter from Birmingham jail, I mean, there's a lot of this. Maybe there are a lot of biblical references. Not a lot, but there are biblical references within the materials. And people think that that might be some kind of foot in the door to start, proselytizing and teaching religion in schools. Did you discuss that concern, and what was your approach to that?
Yeah. First and foremost, we want students to learn about their country, about their culture, about the world, about themselves. You can't understand the world without reference to the Bible, because just the various phrases you mentioned are used every day, and dozens of others are used, and a lot of times we don't even know it comes from the Bible. I mean, look, Western civilization has been said to rest on two peaks: Jerusalem, meaning religious revelation, and Athens, meaning science, the unassisted human reason. Western civilization kind of exists between those two poles. You need both to understand who we are, to understand the civilization you've grown up in. So there are a lot of atheist writers who nonetheless recognize the importance of addressing the Bible, because that is part of what makes us who we are. Now, there's a difference between teaching about religion and proselytizing. You can't understand yourself in the world without learning about religion. That's different from trying to enforce that. So I would say to them, in the interest of learning, you have to do this. And please understand that talking about, you mentioned Martin Luther King's letter from Birmingham jail, replete with biblical references. He was a pastor. Are we worried about students reading that? How can they understand the civil rights movement? And how can they understand the basis of King's moral authority?
Right.
Without understanding biblical
and that to
references.
me is that you can't the point of that letter, of course, is about civil disobedience and moral justice and accepting consequences for your actions, and what is right and what is wrong. I mean, those are the things you need to get from that letter.
Yes.
It's not really about the religious references, but he references Daniel in Lion's Den, he references Nebuchadnezzar. If you don't have a discussion about who those individuals were, you can't understand what you're supposed to get out of that letter.
That's right.
And it is one of the all-time, I mean, certainly in modern history, one of the all-time, great treatises on civil disobedience, which validate our founding principles.
Exactly.
Right? And so there's so much more from pieces like that, but you just can't understand those themes and those messages if you can't talk about them.
No, that's right. Well, take George Washington's farewell address. 1789. First drafts were written for him by Jefferson and Madison. That's not bad speechwriters to have for you. But he says morality and religion are essential props of the Republican government. So you can't even understand our form of government without reference to that. So those who would say keep religion entirely out of it, what they're saying is don't teach our students about one of the most important formative influences on who they are.
And getting back to the point of this, we're trying to teach kids a complete education, a complete and total education, the good, the bad, the ugly, all the way through. But they won't be getting a complete education without this new approach. Which again, I'm just very, especially as someone who has young children about to get into the school system, I'm just elated to know that Texas is really taking on the most important issue, I think, for parents is the quality of the education.
It's everything.
I mean, obviously, we're not going to, we need education funding. I think it's very important for parents to have choice, and we need to get school choice passed. All of those things are very important. But at the end of the day, all of that is simply a way to get to what parents really want, which is, are my kids learning what they're supposed to be learning and preparing them for success, out into the world? Yeah,
and that's what we on the advisory board constantly ask ourselves as we're reviewing the materials submitted to us, and that is this what I want for my kid? Right? Because that's the question, right? And that's why it's so important that this bill empowers parents to see what students are being taught and involves the parents in the students' education. That's absolutely crucial.
Well, thank you, Tom. Thank you for being with us today. Thank you for your part in creating these materials and pushing this process forward. And we are also very hopeful that we'll get it across the finish line here towards the end of the year, because I think this is really, truly one of the most significant education reforms in the history of this state, and we're this close to making sure that it happens.
Yes, we are.
All right. Well, thank you for being with us today. Thank you for listening. Thank you for viewing. We appreciate you being on. This has been The Right Idea in depth with Tom Lindsay, talking about education reform in Texas. And as we like to say here on The Right Idea, as always, do good and risk the consequences. We'll see you next time.